Have you ever wondered what happened to those travelers who never made it home? The ones whose road trips turned into nightmares that no one saw coming. Imagine this: you're driving down a quiet highway, the sun is setting, your favorite song is playing, everything feels perfect. But what if I told you that for some people, this exact scenario was the beginning of the most terrifying moment of their lives? Today, I'm going to share with you 4 absolutely true horror stories that happened to real people on real roads. These aren't urban legends or campfire tales, these are documented cases that will make you think twice before your next road trip. Before we dive in, I want to warn you, these stories contain details of real violence and tragedy. They are not for the faint of heart, but they are important to share because they remind us that sometimes the scariest stories aren't fiction, they are the ones that actually happened. Let me take you to Matamoros, Mexico, where a simple road trip for cosmetic surgery turned into an international nightmare. Then we'll explore the mysterious disappearance of Gabby Petito that captivated the entire nation. We'll also look at how a routine drive through Phoenix could put you in the path of one of America's most terrifying serial killers. And finally, we'll venture into our national parks, where hundreds of people have vanished without a trace. So lock your doors, check your backseat, and pay attention, because the stories I'm about to tell you might just save your life one day. The Matamoros kidnapping. It was supposed to be a simple road trip. 4 friends from South Carolina, Latavia McGee, Sheed Woodard, Zindell Brown, and Eric Williams, packed into a white minivan in March 2023. Their destination: Matamoros, Mexico, just across the border from Brownsville, Texas. Latavia had scheduled a cosmetic procedure, a tummy tuck, something thousands of Americans do every year to save money on medical costs. The group was laughing, playing music, excited about their adventure. They crossed the border without incident, navigating the unfamiliar streets of Matamoros. But what they didn't know was that they had entered one of the most dangerous cities in Mexico, a battleground for rival drug cartels. As they drove through the city looking for the medical clinic, something went terribly wrong. In an instant, their road trip turned into a nightmare. Armed men, members of the notorious Gulf Cartel, surrounded their vehicle. Gunfire erupted. The friends were forcibly pulled from their van and thrown into the back of a pickup truck. Imagine the terror they must have felt in that moment. One minute you're on a road trip with friends, the next you're being kidnapped by cartel members in a foreign country where you don't speak the language. For hours, the group was moved from place to place, never knowing if they would live or die. Sheed Woodard and Zindell Brown were killed. Latavia and Eric were kept alive, but injured and traumatized. Back home, their families had no idea what had happened. Days passed with no contact. The white minivan was found, riddled with bullet holes. Blood stained the pavement where the abduction had taken place. It wasn't until an anonymous tip came in that Mexican authorities were able to locate the survivors. They found Latavia and Eric in a small wooden shack on the outskirts of the city. They were bound, injured, and terrified, but alive. The Gulf Cartel, realizing the international attention the kidnapping had received, did something unusual. They issued an apology letter and handed over 5 of their own members who they claimed had acted against orders. It was a rare acknowledgement from one of Mexico's most violent criminal organizations. But for the families of Sheed and Zindell, no apology could bring back their loved ones. For Latavia and Eric, no amount of time will erase the trauma of those days in captivity. Wondering if each moment would be their last, this story serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous part of a road trip isn't the driving, it's where the road takes you. The friends had no idea they were entering cartel territory. They had no way of knowing their vehicle would be targeted. They were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. And perhaps the most terrifying part, this happened in 2023, not decades ago, not in some remote wilderness, just across the US border, on roads traveled by thousands of people every day. The disappearance of Gabby Petito in the summer of 2021 22-year-old Gabby Petito and her fiancé Brian Laundrie set out on what was supposed to be the adventure of a lifetime, a cross-country road trip in their white Ford Transit van. They documented their journey on Instagram and YouTube, sharing picturesque images of national parks, beach sunsets, and smiling selfies. Their social media painted a picture of the perfect couple living the dream, young, in love, and free to explore America's natural wonders. But behind those carefully filtered photos, something sinister was unfolding. On September 1, 2021, Brian Laundrie returned to his parents' home in Florida alone. The van was there, but Gabby was nowhere to be found. For 10 days, no one reported her missing. 10 days where her family had no idea that their daughter wasn't with her fiancé. 10 days where crucial evidence was potentially being destroyed. When Gabby's parents finally realized something was wrong and reported her missing, the case exploded across national news. People became obsessed with finding the blonde, blue-eyed young woman whose dream road trip had somehow gone horribly wrong. As authorities began investigating, disturbing details emerged. Police bodycam footage from August 12 in Moab, Utah showed the couple after a domestic dispute. Gabby was crying, Brian was calm. The officers separated them for the night but filed no charges. Looking back at that footage now, knowing what would happen next is chilling. The search for Gabby intensified. Internet sleuths combed through the couple's social media posts trying to trace their route. And then on September 19th, the worst fears were confirmed. Gabby's body was found in Wyoming's Bridger-Teton National Forest. The cause of death, strangulation. But Brian Laundrie had disappeared. He told his parents he was going hiking in the Cartel Reserve in Florida on September 13th and never returned. A massive manhunt ensued, with FBI agents and local police searching the swampy wilderness for weeks. On October 20th, human remains were discovered in the reserve, along with personal items belonging to Brian. Dental records confirmed it was him. He had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Nearby, investigators found a notebook containing his confession to Gabby's murder. What makes this case so haunting is how public it was. While most victims of violence disappear without anyone noticing, Gabby's entire journey was documented online. Thousands of people followed their travels, double-tapping those smiling photos, never suspecting the violence happening behind the scenes. The Gabby Petito case reminds us that danger doesn't always come from strangers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes it comes from the person sitting right next to you in the passenger seat. The person you trust most in the world. The person who's supposed to protect you. And it shows how easily a dream road trip can transform into a nightmare with no one to hear your screams but the empty wilderness around you. The Phoenix serial killer. Imagine driving home from work in Phoenix, Arizona. It's 2005 and the city is experiencing a normal, scorching summer. You stop at a gas station to fill up. As you're standing there watching the numbers tick up on the pump, you don't notice the man watching you from a parked car nearby. You don't know that he's deciding whether you'll be his next victim. For nearly a year between 2005 and 2006, Mark Gaudo, known as the Baseline Killer, terrorized Phoenix. He committed 9 murders, 15 sexual assaults, 11 kidnappings, and 36 armed robberies. His victims were ordinary people doing ordinary things, driving home, walking to a friend's house, working at a car wash. What made Gaudo particularly terrifying was his method. He didn't break into homes in the middle of the night. He attacked people in public places, often in broad daylight. He would approach women in parking lots, at bus stops, or as they were getting into their cars. Sometimes he would pretend to need directions or help. Other times he would simply appear with a gun. One of his most chilling attacks happened on September 20, 2005. 2 sisters, ages 23 and 31, were in a park in central Phoenix when Gaudo approached them with a gun. He forced them behind a bush and sexually assaulted them both. Before leaving, he told them, "You were nice. I won't kill you." In another incident, he approached a 37-year-old woman at a bus stop, forced her at gunpoint to a secluded area, and sexually assaulted her. These weren't random acts of opportunity, they were calculated attacks by a predator who had perfected his hunting technique. Gaudo's crime spree created a climate of fear throughout Phoenix. Women were afraid to pump gas alone. People avoided being outdoors after dark. Everyone looked over their shoulder, wondering if they were being watched. The police were desperate to catch him. They collected DNA evidence, interviewed witnesses, and released a sketch of the suspect. But Gaudo was careful. He wore disguises, sometimes a Halloween mask, other times a wig or fake beard. He changed his appearance constantly, making it difficult for witnesses to provide a consistent description. It wasn't until September 2006 that police finally arrested Gaudo based on DNA evidence linking him to the attack on the two sisters in the park. When investigators searched his home, they found jewelry belonging to his victims and other evidence connecting him to the crimes. In 2011, after a lengthy trial, Gaudo was convicted of 67 felony charges, including 9 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death and remains on death row in Arizona. The baseline killer case reminds us that danger can find us in the most ordinary places: a gas station, a car wash, a bus stop, places we visit every day without a second thought. It shows how vulnerable we all are when we're going about our daily routines, never suspecting that someone might be watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And perhaps most disturbingly, it forces us to acknowledge that monsters don't always hide in the shadows. Sometimes they walk among us in broad daylight, indistinguishable from anyone else until it's too late. The national park disappearances. Our national parks are supposed to be sanctuaries, places of natural beauty where we can escape the stresses of modern life. But for hundreds of people, these wilderness areas have become their final resting place, and many of their bodies have never been found. Take the case of James Pruitt. In February 2019, the 70-year-old from Tennessee traveled to Rocky Mountain National Park in Colorado. He was an experienced hiker who had visited the park many times before. On February 28, he entered the park alone. His vehicle was found at the Glacier Gorge Trailhead, a popular starting point for several hiking routes. When Pruitt didn't return, park rangers launched a massive search operation. They combed through deep snow and rugged terrain. They used helicopters with thermal imaging technology. They brought in search dogs specially trained to find human scent. But despite their efforts, James Pruitt vanished without a trace. No clothing, no equipment, no body, nothing. Or consider the disappearance of Floyd E. Roberts, Roman 3. In June 2016, the 52-year-old set out on a multi-day hike in the Grand Canyon. The temperature that day reached 115 degrees, dangerously hot, even for experienced hikers. Roberts was last seen near Tapats Creek, a remote area of the canyon. When he failed to return on his scheduled date, a search began. For days, teams searched the area where he was last seen. They found his backpack near the creek, suggesting he might have been swept away while trying to cross. But despite extensive efforts, his body was never recovered. He simply vanished into the vast wilderness of the Grand Canyon. What makes these cases particularly disturbing is their frequency. According to the National Park Service, approximately 1,600 people are officially listed as missing in national parks, with many more cases going unreported. While most missing persons are eventually found either alive or deceased, hundreds remain unaccounted for. Some disappearances can be explained by natural causes: falls from cliffs, drowning in rivers, attacks by wild animals, or simply getting lost and succumbing to the elements. But others defy conventional explanation. People vanish in areas that were thoroughly searched. Experienced hikers disappear from well-marked trails. Bodies are never found in places where they should be. These mysterious disappearances have led to theories ranging from the practical to the paranormal. Some believe there are serial killers operating in our national parks, targeting isolated hikers. Others suggest that hidden cave systems or underground currents might be responsible for bodies never being recovered. And some point to more supernatural explanations, portals to other dimensions, or cryptid creatures lurking in the wilderness. Whatever the cause, the reality is that every year, people set out on what they think will be a memorable road trip to one of America's beautiful national parks, and they never return. Their cars remain in the parking lots, their belongings in their hotel rooms, their families left wondering what happened to them. The wilderness can be as cruel as it is beautiful, and sometimes it keeps its secrets forever. The New Bedford Highway Killer. What if I told you that some highways are hunting grounds, where predators stalk their prey with terrifying patience? In the late 1980s, the highways surrounding New Bedford, Massachusetts became exactly that. Between March 1988 and April 1989, 9 women disappeared along the roads of this working-class port city. Their bodies were discovered in wooded areas along Massachusetts Route 140 and Interstate 195, creating a web of death that ensnared the entire community. The victims weren't random. The killer had a type: women who were vulnerable, many involved in sex work or struggling with addiction, women whose disappearances might not immediately raise alarms, women who might get into a stranger's car without hesitation. The killer's pattern was methodical. He would strangle his victims and carefully place their bodies in remote locations along the highway corridors. The precision suggested someone who knew the area well, someone who understood how to avoid detection, someone who might even understand police procedures. As the body count rose, fear gripped the community. Women were afraid to walk alone. Hitchhiking, once common in the area, virtually disappeared. Everyone became a suspect: the friendly neighbor, the quiet coworker, the man at the gas station who smiled a little too long. The investigation focused on several suspects, including Kenneth Charles Pont, a local attorney with connections to some of the victims, and Anthony DeGrazia, a construction worker known to frequent areas where the women worked. But despite extensive investigations, no one was ever convicted. What makes this case particularly chilling is that the killer might still be out there. He could be your neighbor, your coworker, or the person driving next to you on the highway. The murders stopped as suddenly as they began, leaving investigators to wonder: did the killer die, move away, or is he still watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again? The New Bedford Highway Killer case remains one of New England's most notorious unsolved serial killer cases. The families of Robin Rhodes, Rochelle Dopierala, Deborah McConnell, and the other victims still seek closure decades later. And the highways of Massachusetts still carry the whispers of their final moments. The Highway of Tears. Imagine driving down a highway so notorious for disappearances that locals have given it a name that sends chills down your spine: the Highway of Tears. This isn't fiction. Highway 16 in British Columbia, Canada, stretching 719 kilometers between Prince George and Prince Rupert, has earned this grim nickname for a reason. Since 1970, between 18 and 40 women have vanished along this remote stretch of road, with the true number possibly being much higher. What makes this case particularly disturbing is the pattern of the victims. The majority were Indigenous women, highlighting a devastating intersection of vulnerability, systemic racism, and geographical isolation. These women often had no choice but to hitchhike due to the lack of public transportation in the region, a deadly gamble on a highway where predators lurk. The harsh landscape surrounding the Highway of Tears makes it the perfect hunting ground. Dense forests line both sides of the road, providing countless places to hide evidence. Cell phone reception is spotty at best, non-existent at worst. In winter, temperatures drop well below freezing, quickly erasing any evidence left behind. Take the case of Tracy Clifton, who disappeared while hitchhiking along the highway, or Helen Claire Frost, who vanished without a trace, or Monica Ignaz, whose body was found months after she went missing. Each woman represents a life cut short, a family left wondering, a community traumatized. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched Project Ipana to investigate these cases, but progress has been painfully slow. Many cases remain unsolved, with evidence long gone and witnesses' memories faded. The investigation has been plagued by allegations of systemic racism and neglect, with families claiming that cases involving Indigenous women weren't given the same priority as those involving non-Indigenous victims. What's perhaps most terrifying about the Highway of Tears is that it's not a historical case, it's ongoing. Women continue to disappear along this highway today. Despite increased awareness, improved safety measures, and community vigilance, the danger persists. The Highway of Tears stands as a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous roads aren't the ones with sharp curves or steep drops, they are the ones where human predators wait for vulnerable travelers, where the vast wilderness can swallow evidence without a trace, and where justice remains elusive for decades. The Lost Women of Highway 20 U.S. Highway 20 in Oregon cuts through some of America's most beautiful landscapes, dense forests, rolling hills, and breathtaking mountain views. But beneath this picturesque surface lies a dark history that few travelers are aware of. From the late 1970s through the early 1990s, this scenic highway became the hunting ground for a predator who targeted young women. The victims Ratchanda Pickle, Kay Turner, Melissa Sanders, Sheila Swanson, and others disappeared from various points along the highway, their lives cut short by a monster hiding in plain sight. That monster was John Ackroyd, a state highway mechanic whose job gave him intimate knowledge of the remote areas along Highway 20. His position was the perfect cover who would question a highway department truck parked along the roadside, who would suspect the helpful mechanic offering assistance to a stranded motorist. Ackroyd's knowledge of the area was extensive. He knew which turnouts were rarely used, which forest roads led to isolated locations, which areas were unlikely to be searched. This wasn't random opportunity, this was calculated predation by someone who used the highway as his personal hunting ground. One of his victims, Kay Turner, was jogging near Highway 20 when she disappeared. Her remains were found months later in a remote wooded area. Melissa Sanders and Sheila Swanson were camping near the highway when they vanished. Their bodies were discovered nearly a year later, hidden in the forest. Perhaps most chilling was the case of Ratchanda Pickle, Ackroyd's 13-year-old stepdaughter who disappeared from their home near the highway. Her body has never been found, but investigators believe Ackroyd was responsible for her disappearance as well. The investigation was hampered by the vast, rugged terrain and the passage of time. Evidence deteriorated in the harsh Oregon weather. Witnesses moved away. Memories faded. But dedicated detectives refused to let the cases go cold, working tirelessly to connect the dots and bring the killer to justice. Eventually, Ackroyd was convicted for the murder of Kay Turner and died in prison in 2016. But he never confessed to the other murders, leaving many questions unanswered and denying closure to the victims' families. The case gained renewed attention through the docuseries Lost Women of Highway 20, highlighting the devastating impact on the victims' families and the community. It exposed vulnerabilities in rural highway safety and law enforcement response to missing persons cases that continue to this day. Highway 20 still winds through Oregon, still beautiful, still busy with travelers. But for those who know its history, every curve, every turnout, every stretch of forest holds the whispers of the women who never made it home, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous predators aren't the ones in the wilderness, but the ones behind the wheel. These stories from Massachusetts, British Columbia, and Oregon join our earlier accounts from Mexico, Wyoming, Arizona, and our national parks to paint a sobering picture of the dangers that can lurk on our highways and byways. But remember, knowledge is power. By understanding these risks, you can take steps to protect yourself and your loved ones during your next road trip. Never hitchhike or pick up hitchhikers, no matter how harmless they may seem. Always let someone know your route and expected arrival time. Keep your phone charged and carry an emergency kit. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The road can take us to amazing places, introduce us to fascinating people, and create memories that last a lifetime. But it can also lead us into danger if we're not careful. By staying vigilant and prepared, you can ensure your road trip stories have happy endings. So the next time you hit the road, remember these 7 true horror stories. They might just save your life. If this video made you think twice about your next road trip, hit that subscribe button for more true stories that might just save your life. And check out my video on unsolved disappearances that will keep you up at night.